And we're on. Awesome. Hello, everybody. I'm Bill, the company's expert, and with a special collaborative live stream with a new guest, Amory Celeste, for the first time. And we are going to be covering just having a general discussion about why finding a job is so difficult at the moment. So, welcome, Amory.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll probably introduce myself just briefly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I am an interview coach. As you mentioned, I have a YouTube channel where I share interview questions and answers and interview tips with anyone that is struggling to pass a job interview. So had the channel for a few years, and it's just so that more people can understand what interviewers want to know, what they want to hear, so they can pass their interview. That's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's great. And this is for anybody who's having some issues with their job search campaign. Maybe it's not going anywhere as quickly as you would like it to go, or you're not achieving great results in the time frame that you were expecting. We're going to be talking about maybe some of the reasons for that, and mainly reasons that are affected by the larger economy and the labor market, and also trying to give some tips of what you can do to mitigate some of these factors in your job search. So why finding a job is so difficult at the moment? There's a lot of things going on at the moment, and in the last couple of years, there's been quite a bit of big changes and shifts we've seen in the labor market, things that job seekers need to be aware of. And I've got several of them here, but I'm wondering, Amory, if you want to sort of kick us off and introduce us to some of those, and we'll start sort of breaking it down.
Sure. I think the biggest one that is causing difficulty is the aftermath of COVID. So globally, everyone will know that COVID affected so many different markets, and the job market was no different. So there are a lot of industries that are still recovering from all of the instability that was caused during that period. So just for anyone who doesn't know what the Great Resignation is, um, it's a period of time starting in 2021 when people felt more comfortable leaving their jobs because the COVID restrictions were lifted. Everyone kind of stayed in their jobs during COVID, or mostly they stayed in their jobs. And then in 2021, you had millions of people resigning pretty much almost at the same time. So I think in the UK, it was 2 million, or roughly around 2 million. In the US, 4 million people.
Mhm.
And I
Wow.
unfortunately only have those figures for those two areas, as that's the most of the people that come to me for support are in,
Well, it's
in those
pretty
two.
telling. That's quite a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. So the resignation rate quadrupled, and that period of time was coined the Great Resignation. Candidates had a lot of power in the hiring process then. So
Mhm.
people were requesting more benefits, working from home, all these things, higher salaries. It was great. Employers were giving candidates what they wanted because they wanted to secure kind of more stable workforce. But obviously that was not sustainable. So the mass hiring, etc., wasn't sustainable. So things are started to balance out, and then inflation has gone through the roof at the same time. So
Yeah.
businesses are cutting back severely. And the blowback from that period of instability is one of the reasons that is so incredibly difficult right now to find a job. So things like working from home promises being taken back by employers. It's kind of I'd say a way to, if you say to someone who accepted a job on the basis of working from home, you can't work from home, the chances are they're going to leave. It doesn't necessarily look as bad as a massive redundancy. So there are a lot of different things going on that are making it more difficult. And also as a result of COVID, lots of industries are struggling. So like hospitality, travel, retail, recruitment, people just don't have the money to spend. I personally know people who, I know someone in sales, another in recruitment, and they've both gone into property. They've just completely changed industries. So I'm not sure if you've, seen anything on your side, or if you kind of know anyone on your side, Bill, but I've just seen so many posts on LinkedIn from people I know and people I don't know saying it's impossible right now. It's so difficult. Um,
Yeah, I've
so
seen I've seen somewhat similar things too, where people are pivoting basically because there's less demand in one industry, but there might be opportunities in another. So yeah, that's. I mean, there's a certain amount of that going on all the time, but I've seen more of it in the last couple of years, definitely.
yeah, I think it's I think it's one of those strange things. Really, I haven't ever seen the job market like this before in my lifetime.
Mm,
I've not seen. I'm 38, and I've never seen, even through 2008. I just haven't seen particularly the job market with such drastic instability. So a few things that I'd say, if you're looking right now and you're struggling, there's a few things that you can do to in relation to the COVID aftermath. And there's no
mm,
easy pill. So I see some people kind of like, oh, I've got the magic trick to guarantee. And I was like, no one can promise that. No one can promise a job. But the few bits and pieces, one of them is upskilling where possible. So digitally, so digital skills are in demand. It doesn't help that that's changing so rapidly due to AI and a bunch of other stuff. People don't have time to learn the new skills. Once upon a time, coding was a big deal, massive, and then chat gpt's come in and a lot of other AI tools, but upskilling to some digital skills where possible, the skills that are not necessarily as easily replaceable.
mm.
um, Networking is a big one. So it wasn't, I'd say, going back a decade, decade and a bit, networking just wasn't, it's important, but today networking can be just as powerful as applying for a job. So speaking to friends, ex-colleagues that have gone into new industries, and actually reaching out to people just to say hi, let them know your situation. And if you are comfortable putting out a post on LinkedIn, that can make a massive difference. I've seen people just land jobs within a few weeks just from putting out posts on LinkedIn saying, I'm looking, this is my situation. And also try to think about growing sectors. So think about any areas that I've mentioned digital already, but any areas that you might know as if you're in an industry and there is a sector that you're aware of where they're hiring, try to maybe consider opening your options up a little bit. That's another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Networking is that's more sort of my kind of what I end up talking about a lot on my channel, as opposed to the method of getting a job through recruiters and post and job postings and all that kind of stuff. That's uh, in my experience, sort of at sort of executive management levels and stuff. That's kind of basically the de facto way of getting a job. And a lot of people at the worker level, professional level, they're kind of, in my experience, they're not really tuned into that kind of stuff. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity there to increase that. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of so from your perspective, even in this is a bigger shift than even back in the 2008 crunch. You're seeing more upheaval now than you did back then. Is that how I understand that?
I'd say so. And I know that I'm looking at it through my kind of small lens of my location and my clients and the people that would speak to me. But I think one of the things I'm noticing is the length of time it's taking people to find a job
Mm.
is just incredible. Like people that would have found a job in 3 months, 12 months time, they're really, really worried. They're still struggling, and they're starting to blame themselves. And, after a while, rejection
Mm.
starts to feel a bit personal.
Yeah.
So, it's, I think the length of time is what's so scary, is that people just don't know what's happening. And then when they get into the job, there is still that instability of, are they going to keep the job? Salaries are lower and things like that. I've just not
Yeah.
seen just the disparity between things being so expensive and salaries staying exactly where they are, which is just,
Yeah, you're
yeah,
right. I mean, it seems to me like there's a couple of things going on. There's obviously some economic shifts and economic forces that are happening, but it's almost like simultaneous to that. You're also getting changes in the way that recruiters are sort of posting jobs and the way that people are hiring and how consequently how job seekers would go about finding a job. Like the method of finding a job is changing at the same time that you're actually getting real economic forces that are upsetting things. So it's almost like a double whammy where you're not just dealing with one shift. Because like you mentioned, with COVID, we had the COVID thing and that shook things up a bit. And then right on its heels, you got sort of the AI disruption that's
yeah,
affecting some things. And then it also seems like independently, um, you've got the way that companies are recruiting, their attitudes towards recruiting and how they go about doing that. And the idea of like fake jobs being, more prevalent now, and like all these other things that are happening sort of also concurrently with those. So, it's not like one challenge people have to overcome. It's multiple challenges all at the same time, and they're combining to make it so that job search is a different game than what it was about like even contrasted with say 3 years ago. I think it's evolved quite a bit.
I'd agree completely. There's so many points that you said there about the attitude towards hiring, the AI point. So I guess with the attitudes towards hiring is something I see, because as well as doing interview coaching, I'm also an HR recruitment specialist as well.
Hmm.
So I definitely see one of the things I see particularly with attitudes towards hiring is old sentiments. So
Hmm.
what you get, particularly in industries where people don't move around a lot, the hiring managers, the people who actually need someone on their team, just don't necessarily have that full awareness of how things have actually changed on the job market. So asking candidates to kind of maybe jump through one too many hoops, do long presentations in first stage interviews. They have to be passionate about, this one's a little controversial because it might be a
Hmm.
personal opinion, but being passionate about the company values, they have to almost would have wanted to work here for free. And then on top of that, then we can consider them. They have to have that absolute passion. And I think that is a little slightly outdated, especially when I speak to younger candidates that are, say, Gen Z. You can get some incredible skill sets, but people do just want to work, and they also want to have a life outside of work. It's not necessarily they want to work, round the clock, have, put the company first before everything personal, and know that, they say they finish at 5, they don't necessarily want to work later. And there are some managers that have a very old school view, I think, in terms of their hiring. And keeping candidates waiting is another thing as well. Is that, well, the candidate's coming to us for a job, they can wait while we sort out internal politics, or while I go, I'll start the hiring process now, but I'm on holiday for 3 or 4 weeks. And so it's kind of, what I do in my job is try to kind of combat that, and say, encourage managers, hire when you can actually hire. It's so soul destroying to a candidate to apply and get a response 4 weeks later, or to have to wait for an interview for 3 weeks, and they might be wondering, how am I going to pay my mortgage at the end of the month? But they're waiting for this interview. So it's kind of, there is an education required, I think, as well, for the people in the people that are hiring in companies, that those kinds of attitudes do also have an effect on how difficult it is to find a job at the moment.
Yeah, it's like I don't actively work as a recruiter. I'm not a recruiter. I've hired recruiters, and I've been a hiring manager, so I've hired people directly and all this kind of stuff. And you just mentioned like sort of several things, different changing attitudes. Whereas, for example, you mentioned the importance of showing a passion for the specific job that you're interviewing for in the interview, and communicating that you have a real desire to do this specific job. Um, things like that. Like, it's very hard for me to get a lot of clarity on exactly what's going on, because, you talked about traditional attitudes, people look for this, and maybe more modern attitudes, people look for that. And as we all know, like everything happens some of the time. So if you were to look out right now, you're going to get hiring managers that have a very traditional view of like how to select a candidate. And then you're going to get equally, you're going to get other hiring managers that have a very modern view of how you select a candidate. And, they're more aware of the typical circumstances that job seekers are under now, whereas other people might not be. You're going to find all of that concurrently out there. But what I find hard to get is like the proportions. There's this happening, there's that happening, and you always get that. You got that 10 years ago. You got traditionalists, you got modernists, that uh, people
That's
that
true.
hire exclusively through networking, people that instead put all their faith in like ATS and these very sort of process driven hiring practices. Some people that do it all, by personal connections. Some people that do it all, by very regimented official hiring process. It's hard for me to know which one is prevalent. They always seem to be with us. And
Yeah.
so I generally, I've advised people in saying like, look, everything is going on simultaneously. So if you are in a situation where, you know, you would get hired easier through, this method, or you would appeal to someone who's, looking at things from a traditional view or a more modern view, keep trying because they're all out there. It just, you haven't encountered that type of person yet that places value on what you have, or caters more towards your circumstances. Uh, I mean, maybe you have more insight into this. Like I see everything happening some of the time, and I don't know what the rates of these occurring and what the stats are, in
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah, I'd say unfortunately I don't have stats, but I've done a lot of contract work over the last 20
Hmm.
years,
I
pretty
don't know
much
if anyone does really, right? Like I
yeah,
mean,
that's
I don't
true.
know who would
That's
have that,
true.
but yeah.
That's
But
true.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so over the last 20 years, I've done a lot of contract work, mostly in corporate settings, and you're completely right. There are always going to be some modern, some traditionalist. I think that
Mm.
the traditionalist hirers stand out now because the market is so volatile. So if it only affected a smaller, a few hundred candidates, now it's affecting a couple thousand people. So it just feels much more intense. But I think you're right. I think that it
Mm.
is a mixture. I think it is a mixture of hiring. It's just unfortunately it has such a massive blowback. So, for example, I know I mentioned briefly before we started about candidates saying that I'll see a job, an hour later it's got 1,000 applicants,
Mm.
and that is something that I've never seen before. And when you have a recruiter that is has 20 or 30 vacancies at each. And each of them have hundreds of candidates. It slows down hiring, screening, arranging interviews, and then you get managers that take a very long time to respond, very long time to give feedback and things like that. So one of the things I also say to candidates in this area is I still see this today, is applying to multiple roles. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I know how it feels. I know how, someone's
Yeah.
done a lot of contract. I know how it feels to find a job that you fit perfectly, and you apply and you're just like, right. And then maybe they contact you for a first day screening call, but it's in 2 weeks. I see it so much of the time where candidates slow down during that 2 weeks because they kind of
Oh
just
yeah.
want that job. And I get that, but you just don't have the luxury of that right now. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, I agree. I advise people like I mean it's very hard. It's one thing to say this, it's another thing to do it, but keep moving forward. If you get bites, to some of these things you've put out there and some of them are coming back and you're getting responses, requests for more information, requests for interviews, second interviews and so on, you know, keep moving forward. If they respond, you do a second interview and you're feeling really good about it, great. But don't let that stop you from sending out more applications or pursuing other opportunities or doing more networking, whatever your methods are that you're pursuing in your job search campaign. It's very
Yeah,
hard. There's a psychological component there. People, they start like placing their hope on that, and they in their mind it's becoming more of a certain thing, so they lose the impetus or the incentive to keep looking for other opportunities and stuff. But you really need to resist that, in my opinion, and just keep moving forward up until the point that you have a offer in your hand that's signed and accepted and and agreed upon. It's not over till that point and you've actually started, in my opinion.
exactly. That's what I used to do. That's what I've done most of my, literally until I have that offer. I don't care whether I've got an invitation to a first stage interview or final stage interview. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't got the job. I almost haven't got that opportunity. Even I don't even see that. I only see it as an opportunity once the offer's there. And I kind of train my clients to do the same thing. Keep a tracker so that you can see your progress, so that when someone comes back to you, you know what job it's about and things like that. But just make sure that because when you build that momentum, what happens is by the time you get to offer stage, you have way more options. And no matter how good a job seems, you can get to offer stage and then they'll change the salary or change the role, or
Yeah.
so many things can happen. So give yourself as many options as possible. And you're right, it's easier said than done. It really is. But I think that this economy requires that just extra layer of resilience. It's hard, it's not easy, but once you've done it and you start to build that momentum, it starts to get easier because you have people calling you back, in closer intervals.
Definitely. And I think that it's hard for people because someone will get some like an employer who's stated a few things verbally. They haven't sent an offer in writing, but they've said a few things verbally, to give you almost the impression that, oh, it's a done deal, it's in the bag, it's going to happen. And sometimes, let's face it, sometimes people do that as almost a kiss off. I want to say something, I don't want to tell you to your face that we've rejected you, or it doesn't look good or anything like that, so I'll just say whatever pleasantries, yeah, it's looking good, talk to you soon, goodbye, kind of thing. And people really take that literally, especially the less experienced job seekers. They take those things literally, and then that causes them to stop their job search essentially and focus their hope on that one opportunity, and
Yeah.
it ends up not working out, and it's very tragic. So always keep moving forward for these things. Okay, so you mentioned several things, but you talked about the COVID aftermath. Another thing that I think we talked about at the beginning was AI layoffs in the wake of the AI disruption.
Oh,
Can you give me your take on that, and how big it is, and what form it takes, and what people should do about that?
yeah, so AI, I mean, it's just massive in terms of the impact. But so AI and also automations as well. So that is replacing a variety of roles. Or just to be blunt, it's replacing a variety of roles in different
Mhm.
sectors. So anything from graphic design, coding, tech, manufacturing, logistics. It's all people are bringing in AI for loads of things. Which is, as just a side note, it's interesting that that's the case because I watch a lot of sci-fi, and when I remember movies that I'd watch in the 90s that were from the 80s, it was always, oh, we'll have robots that will come in and do things, and that those will be the first types of jobs to go. So the irony of actually AI coming in and it being the more creative roles like graphic design and roles that people might think would take a long time to be replaced that have been affected first is surprising and interesting. But what it's doing, it's increasing competition for roles that can't easily be automated. So there are some creative roles, like the kind of some writing roles, some designers, some artists, etc. Physical roles, like say social workers, therapists, teachers, doctors can't be, they can't be easily replaced. And I have actually got some stats as well on this one because I
Okay.
remember seeing this and writing it down a year ago. So BuzzFeed laid off 12% of its workers and used ChatGPT for more content creation. And this was January last year. The content creation was terrible, so it
Yeah.
wasn't good quality. But that's what they did, which really surprised me. I thought industries would test it bit by bit, but it seems like some industries have just gone, the whole hog. Like, we're going to take 10% of our workforce, replace it with AI. Same with Google. So Google was contemplating 30,000 layoffs in this year. And that was back in December. They had already laid off 12,000 employees. Same with Salesforce. IKEA replaced some of its call center with an AI bot as well. And there's varying views on how bad people think this is going to be, or how many more jobs will be affected. But that's one thing that is definitely being affected by AI. And I think that in some cases, job seekers, it helps if they're more comfortable with technology. So this could be even things like just video interviewing. So, like HireVue or other AI systems or video interview systems that is used for candidate assessment, just being comfortable with that. Not necessarily about developing advanced technical skills, because the industry is changing fast and people haven't had time to develop all the skills. But it can be an ATS, which is an applicant tracking system. That's what, when you submit your resume to a role, it goes into an applicant tracking system, and they're using more AI to develop those systems, as well as automated video interviews. So those types of things are those types of AI things are affecting hiring and affecting layoffs and redundancies as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a lot of sort of MBA programs and engineering programs, they have some course that's usually something to do with the history of technology, the evolution of technology. And I actually offer a course about, it's an MBA that includes that component. And the name of the topic varies depending on what discipline it's in, but it's basically a study of how technology evolves. And based on this, you can actually make predictions and say, like, okay, well, you know, this is sort of the next step, right? And a big part of technology is to do with automation. So if you look at almost anything, it starts being very, very manual, very, it's got a lot of, think of like an elevator. Like let's take like anything, an elevator, the lift, right? In the
Yeah.
UK. And when
Yeah.
the original lift, it was very manual. You needed an operator to operate the elevator when you get on, and you tell them what floor you want, and they operate all the series of levers and things, and then and to send it on its way. And then over time, that gets more automated. It gets more automatic. Cars are the same thing. You had your manual transmission, right, where you change the gears, and most cars now are automatic transmission. It was a bit of a shift to get people used to that, and then if you extrapolate that thinking, it's led to things like where you have almost a fly-by-wire kind of thing in your car, where it has sensors and cameras that detects how far you are from the car in front of you, and it backs you off and all this kind of stuff. And then the next stage would be things like self-driving cars, where it has all the pieces. You just have a human in the middle, sort of like approving everything, even though the car itself is capable of driving itself. It's capable of knowing where it is, and it has the navigation to understand where it's going. Now you just take out the human in the middle, and then you allow the pieces to connect directly. So you can see a map of this stuff. And the AI technologies that we're seeing right now, I mean, it's exactly on the right path that many people would predict. When you look at the history of coding, you look at software development, things like this, it's yet another step where you're taking away the manual control and you're automating more of the process. So from my perspective, I mean, I know a lot of people have been crying doom and gloom about, in general terms about it, and how we're all going to be out of a job and all this kind of stuff. I personally don't see it that way. I mean, it is definitely disruptive. It's the first truly disruptive thing I've seen in my life since probably the last thing was like what they used to call the Web 2.0, where everybody could publish their own content. That became widespread with Facebook and YouTube and all that. And before that, it was just the internet. Like it's the fact that you could have a website. Those are the two sort of disruptive things I've seen before this. This is the first disruptive thing in like over 10 years at least. And I think that, I mean, I know there's people that study this. There's professors that understand this stuff really, really well, but it seems like there's a period of disruption. And then ultimately, at least every other time this has happened in the past, I've given to understand, it then creates jobs. So, you have a sort of period of confusion and disorganization as people pivot. There's all of a sudden no more demand for something, but then you get, oh, there's demand for this now, and now there's demand for this. And so I think we're still waiting for a lot of that to show up. It hasn't kind of happened yet. I
Yeah.
think. Have you seen a lot of jobs created that are specifically created because of AI? Like that AI is now here?
Apart from literal programming for AI systems,
Mm.
apart from that job, no, I haven't. And I think
Mm.
one of the concerns, I mean, this gap of time that you mentioned is an opportunity for people to create a lot of content saying, oh, this is what it's going to be. But I think one of the things that I'd be interested to see is, as more, there's more technological developments, they change faster and faster. And so, I'm wondering, because like I say, recently there was coding, programming, even tech recruitment itself was its own niche because the demand for digital skills was so high. And now a lot of people have replaced a lot of things with AI. So, will people be able to develop those skills fast enough to, for whatever the next round will be? So I don't know. I haven't really seen that. But I do think that learning a little about AI, if you're not too sure about, I've spoken to a lot of people who have never used ChatGPT. They vaguely heard about it, and because it's my world, of things, I'm like, oh, you've got to use this tool.
Yeah.
Just learn it. Watch a quick video on ChatGPT, and how automation is used in hiring. That could be a huge advantage. But also, one thing I'll just caveat right now is please don't get carried away with ChatGPT, because it is not a person. And while it generates some really impressive stuff, only use it as a guide. I've seen so many CVs with on cover letters with prompts still left in them.
Oh,
Yeah,
where you go to Chat GPT and write me a resume, and then it just
yeah,
poof, there you go. Yeah, yeah, I
exactly.
agree. It's an incredibly useful tool, but it is not the
Hmm.
be all end all.
Mm.
And I agree with the sentiment that if you want to make yourself more valuable, whether it's directly to be hired in this climate that we have right now, or just in general going into the future, is like learn about AI, learn about how to use the various tools we have now, and also where it's likely to go in the near future, and get fluent in that. That will only help you. It's creating tremendous opportunities to change things. So if you are someone that knows how to use the new technologies to change things, to make things more efficient and more effective, you will be highly valued by employers in a general sense. So that's definitely something I agree with you, Amory, and I encourage everyone to consider doing, especially if you are between jobs right now and you're looking to improve your skills and refresh your skill set. That's definitely something to tack on right now.
Yeah. And also, one other thing is about resumes is just optimizing your resume for recruitment systems as well. So
Yeah,
I specialize more in the interview side of coaching than resumes, but I do get questions on it. But there's loads of videos that you can look up how to optimize that. So what I mean is using the right keywords. So let's say that you're looking for a role as a sales executive, but you don't have the word Salesforce in there, which is a system that is commonly used for certain types of sales roles. And if that company is using an AI system, it may say the recruiter might program it to say, okay, I just want to see all the CVs with the word Salesforce in first, and they won't even see your CV because that word isn't in there. So that would be a keyword, and you need to optimize your CV for keywords. So make sure that commonly used terminology, commonly used terms in your industry are actually in your CV. That is something that is really commonly missed. So just spend a bit of time doing that if you're looking for a job right now.
that's great advice, because it's sort of common knowledge, at least it seems like it is to me. It's common knowledge that if you're sending a resume in response to a job posting, and the job posting has spelled out their requirements and what they're kind of looking for and all this, I mean, it's relatively intuitive that the terminology that they've used in the job posting are things that you would probably want to have on your resume. Like, they're looking for those specific things. What's less intuitive is, like you mentioned, if they haven't mentioned the word Salesforce explicitly in the job ad, but yet they have an expectation that, we're only interested in people that have used Salesforce, because maybe it's not directly used for the job, but it's implied that if you don't have the word Salesforce on there, you're not versed in Salesforce, and that's like considered a fundamental necessary requirement or skill for anyone who would want to be in this position of sales, vice president of sales or whatever it is, something like that. So if they don't mention it explicitly, but that you have to have it in there, that's a little more challenging, you know. So that's an interesting point that you bring up, where you would have to also think, what haven't they explicitly mentioned that I probably should have on there to be taken seriously?
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely. Yeah, I agree. And I
Yeah.
think there's so much information on the internet that it can get a bit confusing. But I remember, like, when I started out in the working world, the internet was not what it is today at all.
Hmm.
So the information was just not there. And there are a few key things that you would look at before when you're job hunting. So like, you're making your CV or resume, you're making sure that you understand the role, making sure you understand the company. Do watch videos, and this is not just a plug for my own channel, although you can go and watch Anne-Marie Celeste Interview Coach if you want to. But there's loads
Yes,
of
check it out.
channels. There's loads of channels, loads of different advice from different people that talk about these key things. If you're not taking in that advice, you are at a disadvantage. I'll just be blunt, because I remember collecting so much information from my sister and my friends before, because all I had was maybe encyclopedias and the local library and maybe some information I could store on a floppy disk. That's what it was like. The internet didn't really have people, experts on there who could tell you pretty much all of the shortcuts. So please just
Yeah.
spend a bit of time looking. I know some people that look for months and then they watch one or two videos and they're like, oh my gosh, it's completely I'm getting responses now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Things
agree.
like
I
that really
agree.
help.
It's incredible. And it's this endless game. That's the thing. It's this endless game of cat and mouse uh, between recruiters and ATS systems on one hand, and job candidates on the other, and all the little tips and tricks to sort of elevate yourself above the crowd, and then the system wisens up to that little trick, and then it compensates for it, and then it doesn't really work anymore, and then you have to come up with a new trick, and it's that sort of endless kind of churn. I feel, I mean, I'm looking at from the outside, sort of looking in, and that's
Yeah.
that's how it's always seemed to me. The other thing is, at least in my experience, like I come from, I'm from Canada, so where I am, uh, most people that have jobs, something like eight, like in my province of Manitoba, most people that have jobs work in small companies. Small company being 500 employees and less.
Mhm.
It's only like 15% or something of people that have jobs in big companies. Big companies are still by far more visible. So if you didn't know this, you might get the impression that, oh, everybody works in a big company. But the reality is most people work in small companies. They might not have very super formal hiring practices. Now, that's not universally the case. I mean, you're in the UK. Do you know what the breakdown approximately is in the UK, like what you have to deal with?
I don't know the breakdown in the UK, but I do agree, and certainly as I've progressed through my career, I have geared more towards smaller companies as time has gone on,
Hmm.
just simply because of personal preferences of what I can put into a role and what I can get out of it, and also things like the hiring process. I do find that the smaller companies are just less formal. For
Yeah.
example, Amazon. I was going for a role in Amazon. This was in the last, say, 5 years, and it was something like 3 to 6 months, which I blew my mind. So I've
Yeah.
interviewed a lot of big companies, or invited to interview at big companies like the Microsofts and so on. I'm trying to think of some of the others, but like Coca-Cola, etc. And I've never seen a hiring process like that. Now I know that Amazon's workforce is largest in the world, but I basically they have this long, complicated process. So they send you technology to book your interview. The technology I used didn't work, and then they booked my interview for midnight because there was like 6 people trying to manually book my interview because they have thousands and thousands of interviews they have to book, or hundreds every week.
Wow.
And I just dropped out and went to a local company instead because I just thought, yeah, the role sounded really exciting. It was like something in games and music and managing a great team, etc. But I just thought I'd rather not, because that's when you get into a big brand company and you go in, it's bricks and mortar, it's 4 walls, and it's still run by humans, same as a small company. It's just they might have slightly fancier technology and longer processes, but
Yeah.
actually it can be more rewarding in smaller companies. So
Oh,
sometimes people
definitely.
forget to look locally because we're always looking online, but do if you can do a local search, or even if they have local directory still, I don't know if they have them in Canada, but there's loads of companies that don't have the same visibility as the big ones, but they are there, and they can sometimes have opportunities as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree 100%. It's definitely uh, less formal in smaller companies, and that can be a considerable advantage if, when you go through the process with large companies, you're really approaching the limit of how bureaucratic and convoluted and slow the processes can be. It's actually surprising hearing that about Amazon, because that really does break the narrative with companies like Amazon that are known for being very, very efficient from the operations side. So you
Yeah,
wouldn't have thought that their HR, at least the recruitment and selection processes, would be that slow and cumbersome and
yeah.
problematic. Yeah,
Yeah, Amazon. I was going to do a video on it actually. I was in two minds. I was going to do a video on this about a year or two ago because I just thought, I can't believe that was the
yeah,
experience. And I looked on Glassdoor, which is a site that people write down their experiences working for a company, and also what their experience is like in the interviewing process.
mm,
And there were loads of people that had mirrored that. So I did look at
mm.
Glassdoor before, but there's hundreds of reviews on
That's interesting. So you're
Amazon. You can't
definitely
beat that.
not
And I was looking
alone.
specifically for people talking about that after I dropped out. Oh, yeah. I mean, people were
Yeah,
saying, "Oh, my interview was in 6 months," and I thought, I mean, that's just based on them hoping that you'll wait because their brand is so large that people will just wait 6 months. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's an excellent company from what I hear, and there are a lot of positive experiences of people going through the interview process. That was only my experience, so and a few others
Well,
as well.
still, I mean, it's not something you want to discount. I mean, oh, sure,
No.
it's something that you hear, but if
Hmm.
the only evidence from your own personal experience is that that is 180 degrees polar opposite, not the case, then that really sheds some light on it. I've heard similar things about companies like Google and stuff. Once again, it breaks the narrative. It's quite the opposite of the impression you're given that of Google being efficient and sort of in touch in other areas, particularly their operations, right? So it really goes to show you that these companies are so big that the different functions or the different departments, it can be run entirely differently. You
Yeah.
know, um,
Yeah, and
so
also the competition as well. I mean, just with with everything that's it just in terms of the current job market, going for a role like I don't know if people still have this sentiment. I haven't seen as many people that will say this is my dream company, because at one point Google, Amazon, like the FANG companies,
mm,
the top companies, that some people would say that's the only place I want to work, and I just thought whenever I'd see that, I'd always think I really wish they'd broaden their, because they've created an idea in their head of what it would be like to work there, and actually sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not like that. It really is run by human beings on the inside. It's four walls, a chair, a computer. If that's the type of job you do, it's just that the branding on the office walls is a bit fancier, the technology might be a bit fancier, and maybe sometimes the perks. But bearing in mind, one thing I'll say about Amazon is that their salaries are very, very good. But what I've heard from clients is that what they want in return for those salaries is something that I'd say is something that is less attractive to candidates nowadays. So just the constant burnout style commitment to a job, um, and that's what I've heard from the outside, is that it's hard work. Yes, they pay well, but if you are somebody who wants a work-life balance, or you're saying, what, I want to spend more time with my family, I want to have a life outside of work, I don't want to be exhausted whenever I finished work, and just sleep the whole weekend because I'm tired from the week, then just bear that in mind when if you are chasing somewhere that has high salaries. um
yeah, I
so
agree. I totally
yeah.
agree. That's been my experience. I mean, I started off my career working for big blue chip companies, and that formed my first impressions of the corporate world and how things were done. And then my eyes were opened. I was hired on with a smaller company, and I spent the second part of my career in small business, and I've never gone back. There are tremendous advantages in small business, and you know, like one thing that I encountered right off the hop, I worked for a large blue chip company, and exactly what you said. They're very formal. Work life balance is terrible. Um, they pay a higher salary, but for some reason that I mean, I understand the reasons, but their decision to do it this way is rather incomprehensible to me. Is that okay, you're running a 24/7 operation, 24/7, 365. You require people to come in on weird schedules and all this kind of stuff, but it's almost like the formalism that they feel they need to have, and they do need to have to a degree. It prevents you from working with people the way that maybe you'd be able to do in a smaller organization,
Hmm.
and that's really the source of a lot of their problems. And they would introduce things like stack ranking, where in every department you had to rate your employees. So like in every work group, you have to rate your employees like A, B, or ABC. Like A are
Hmm.
the overachievers, B are average, and C are the underperformers. And every year or something, you would eliminate the C's, and you'd promote the A's. And every department, every group of say 10 employees, you like 15% of the employees would have to be rated as C. So what that meant was that, as I'm sure you might have already seen, is that you're in competition with all your coworkers to keep your job. And so assisting each other no longer exists. Sabotaging each other starts to happen. Just a terrible environment. And in
Yeah.
the end, from a business perspective, you really shoot yourself in the foot. And there's a lot of disadvantages for this. So it's like they've got economies of scale and all kinds of great things going for them,
Mhm.
but they almost seem to be sabotaging themselves with having some of these policies with regard to how they manage their employees.
Yeah.
And the smaller businesses are able to dispense with a lot of that, and they have an advantage. So it's always been a sort of hidden gem, or like working for smaller businesses,
Yeah.
because of some of these reasons. And I think a lot of job seekers, they're not as aware that these exist, or they don't have the attraction, like you were saying. Amazon and Google and Apple and these places they've got a great reputation, but the reality might be somewhat different when you actually start working there.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of what you said, I've seen before. That kind of they had called them A players, B players, and C players. Everybody wants A players, which was I don't know where that started. I'm not sure what that stems from, but it ended up with, like you say, a very unhealthy workforce, and also in my view, in order to make most companies work, you do need a mixture. You do need a variety. You can't have a group of people that say all want to be the manager, or want to be the leader, or vice versa. So it's really, really interesting that that was the case. And I've heard similar things about Amazon, that not exactly the same, but they have their leadership principles, and that in within the workforce, people have to kind of rate each other. It's just a requirement, which means that you're regularly having to find things about your colleagues to rate in one way or another. And I just think they have the nice branded videos of what it's like to work there and everything. But one of the things I always say is just try to check reviews. And I appreciate that, not everyone has the same view of, say, Glassdoor or Indeed in their reviews, but it can. I'm not saying every bad review is genuinely how it is, but look for themes. So if there are 200 reviews and 50 of them all say one thing or another, but there's a theme of working late in all of them, then there is a high chance that that theme has some basis to it.
Definitely.
So yeah, that would be one thing I'd say. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of just giving yourself chances because of the competition, and something else just crossed my mind as well about a few other bits affecting the market at the moment, which is things like delayed retirements. So I have seen a few bits and pieces about people talking about ageism a lot, and I've seen this certainly as I've got older. Is there people there may be more experienced workers plus older workers that are in the market because of financial uncertainty. So people that are postponing retirement, experienced candidates on the market. So some of those experienced candidates will be going into certain roles that can have a knock-on effect to, say, some recent graduates. And then on the flip side of that, you've got people saying, well, actually, because I'm an older worker, I'm experiencing discrimination, which I've heard a lot about this too, and it can be. So these are a few bits and pieces of things. Is one of them is they sound really, really simple. Is tailoring your application. And you've probably seen this a lot of times if you're looking at job seeking tips or following pages that give job seeking tips. And I know it can be exhausting, but it really pays off, because if you're not doing that, and what I mean by tailoring your application is making sure that the CV or the resume and the cover letter that you are submitting to a role is relevant to that role. And the reason I say that is if you're not doing that, you're almost wasting your time in some cases applying at all. And I don't want
I
that to
agree.
sound
It's
too
almost
negative.
it's almost not worth doing it if you're not going to tailor it. I
Right.
agree. Yeah.
Exactly. So, don't give yourself no chance at all, but then put in all the work. Just, less applications, higher quality. Because that's one of the reasons I think that people say, oh, applying doesn't really work as much anymore. Some of the applications I see are mind-boggling. Like I said, they have prompts left in from ChatGPT. They have, completely irrelevant cover letters, or cover letters that someone's used for a totally different company. You're working for company ABC, and they say, oh, I really want to work for company 123. And it's like, I know that you're applying for a lot of jobs, but stuff like this doesn't help, because
Yeah.
hiring managers
Yeah.
don't understand, and
Yeah.
so
That's pretty sloppy. Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
yeah, yeah, I see a lot of that more and more. So, I said, reaching out to your network. I mentioned, or something else is also your resume and your LinkedIn. So, a bit on personal branding, just making sure that all of wherever you are publicly. So, if your Facebook is public, your LinkedIn is public, your Instagram, and so on. Make sure that those things are they match your resume, because some teams or some places will go and do a quick search. Make sure that how you present yourself, your brand, is consistent across any platform that is public. So that's one thing. And also just look up a couple of videos on personal branding, because that could be another 3 hours, and I there's so much on that topic, but it's so important. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just to kind of summarize. So, would you say that the correct strategy to do this for a job seeker is to have a high quality application and ensure that that's what you're doing? Everything that goes out is a high quality application, meaning that it's been customized to the role that you're applying for. So it's tailored specifically. You use the same lingo, you use all the keywords, you take the trouble to insert those into your resume, your cover letter, in a way that makes sense. It's done properly, it's not sloppy, it's not done just by automation, but you've actually proofread it, and it reads correctly. And then do as many of those as you can without eroding the quality. Like, would you say that would be the strategy to use?
Yes, yes, that's the perfect explanation, actually. And I think one of the things I see that affect that strategy is, especially if you are really desperate to leave your job, or you're in a situation where you're unemployed and you really need work fast, people will start like that. They'll have a CV for a particular role, HR or whatever. Everything will match. And then as they go forward and the weeks go by, they haven't heard anything. They start to apply for other things using the same stuff. And then it's months down the line, and they're like, I've applied for thousands of roles. And I'm like, honestly, what you have to imagine is, somebody comes to a recruiter and they say to the recruiter, I want a customer services executive. And the recruiter will send the manager CVs of someone who has experience that's similar. And the manager says, no, I don't want to see any of those. I only want to see the person with customer service. And then somebody applies for the job and they have sales executive, and another person applies and they've got customer service executive on their CV. The customer service executive is going to be shortlisted. That's just how it is. So please try to think a little bit on what the recruiter will look for, because that will give you pretty much your answer on what you need. And also, one other thing as well is, try to stick to the point on your CV, on your resume. Try not to include things that you want to tell the recruiter. Think about what the recruiter wants to know. So if you were head of a club, valedictorian or something in a college or university, it's great, but is it relevant to the job? If it's not, my advice is just to remove it completely. In this
Yeah.
job market, in this economy, keep it highly, highly relevant. You don't want that 10 seconds that the recruiter spends scanning your CV to be taken up with them looking at loads of irrelevant information. So that's another point as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say to job seekers with regard to that stuff, it's very hard because the ego is real, and you might have stuff on your resume that you're very proud of. It's a real feather in your cap. It's part of your sense of self-worth. You have this accomplishment, or this education, or this experience, or this trait, or whatever it is. Now, if you're applying for a job where they haven't specifically requested that, and at the same time, this thing that you have is not directly related to that job, it may be painful, but to apply for that particular job, it may be to your advantage to remove that from your resume or your application, because what the recruiter wants, and you can give me your take on this, Amory, what the recruiter wants is, they want the requirements they've stated, and anything that's not really closely related to that, it just serves to water down what you do have. If it's irrelevant or it's not something that's directly applicable, uh, you know, it serves to water down, your value proposition in your application. So it may
Yes.
be hard, but take it off. It doesn't matter. You've still achieved the accomplishment. You're still the same person you were just when you apply for that job. It's not about what you think, is great about yourself. It's about, do you have what they're looking for? And if you do, that's what gets you hired.
Exactly. So yeah, I couldn't really put it much better. Just keep it as highly relevant as possible. And that includes protected characteristics. I won't go into it too much, but these are the things like religion, age. I've seen people putting their full address. Picture is a bit of a controversial one because it depends on where you are in the world. In some countries, it is the cultural standard to include a picture on your CV, and if it is, then do, because otherwise you'd be putting yourself at a disadvantage. But if it's not, like in the UK, it's not, then I don't recommend it, because everything that you put on that piece of paper is what they are assessing you by for the job. Do you want to be assessed by your picture? Then don't put it if you don't need to. Do you want to be assessed by your age? Then don't put it if you don't need, and so on and so forth. If you want to be assessed by your religion, then don't put it if you don't need to.
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
normally my advice on that. I've had a lot of pushback on saying about the picture on the CV thing, but that's what I've seen, is that people put pictures and people make snap judgments from a picture.
Well,
I've
you're going to get,
yeah,
like, this is where we come back to, you're going to get all kinds. Some people,
yeah.
like if you're a hiring manager, for example, like you're not a recruiter, you're a hiring manager, and someone sends you a resume with a picture, maybe it does serve to distinguish you so you stand out a bit from all the other generic resumes that don't have a picture on it. But if you're applying to a job that's at a large organization, it goes through a recruiter and an entire HR department and ATS and all this kind of stuff. Maybe I can see what you're saying to be perfectly true in that case. It doesn't provide you any advantage, and it can be a liability depending on the details of that particular application. So it might make sense. It sort of decreases the attack surface of things
Yes.
they have to fault you on, right? So if you don't need to
Exactly.
include it, don't include it, and then it doesn't become part of the equation, right?
I might steal that phrase. That's a really good one. It does. That's exactly what it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've covered. Okay. So we've covered the COVID aftermath, the AI layoffs, hiring processes being slower. Do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I may have touched on this a bit earlier, but I think the slower processes are due to, I think one of the things I mentioned was the old school views, so the old sentiments that managers have. Cautious hiring is one of the things that's causing slower hire processes as well. So
Hmm.
due to the COVID aftermath and the mass hiring, it takes longer to assess the budget for a role, get the role approved internally. It normally goes through a whole process, and also to assess candidates, because employers are more concerned about someone not working out, because it does actually cost to hire someone and then have them leave or not pass probation. So the cautious hiring is another thing that is is causing slow hiring processes. Another
Is
thing
there
is,
anything?
oh
Is
yeah.
there anything that job seekers can do to mitigate this in any way? Like, I'm trying to think. Like, what would a job seeker be able to do, other than, I don't know, just keep applying for other opportunities? Is there any real
Uh,
recourse?
I think one of the things, it depends. You can, and it also depends on how transparent the company wants to be. So
Mm.
sometimes the candidate can't do much, but sometimes there's telltale signs. So for example, if you go into a process and everything is very, very, very slow, and then when you speak to them, they're not clear on certain things, like this
Mm.
role might sit in that team or that team, we haven't decided. This role is to cover someone that may or may not return, and we haven't decided on that yet. We want to do final stage interviews in 4 months' time. Those types of things indicate that the process is moving really slow and that things might not be defined. So actually, you might be better off just focusing on other processes. Stay in that process, but don't prioritize it. So that's
Yeah.
probably the only tip that I'd say.
So recognizing the telltale signs of a very lengthy, convoluted hiring process. I mean, that could go up to including fake jobs, right? I mean, I know
Sure.
that's an issue that is also contributing to this. There's a lot of fake job postings. Companies are not actually hiring, but they'll put up a job posting for what? For market research purposes, and things like this is kind of what I just assume.
Yeah, there's so many different reasons. There's so many different reasons that a company might do that. So an example could be a company wants to, they're gearing up to maybe sell the company I'm going from a
Ah,
high level here,
mm,
and they want to show that there's loads of hiring activity. They want to make the company look as attractive as possible.
yeah,
So they approve a round of hiring, but everything is happening very, very slowly. And then it may be that the recruiter or even the hiring manager doesn't even know that that job isn't going to ever be the case. And at the last minute, this is when the recruiter will get something. I might get something saying, "Oh, we're not going to go forward with this role anymore. We're going to fill it into,
Yeah, I know what that looks like. You approve the position, but then don't approve the final budget. There's like all kinds of games and stuff like that,
oh
and it's
yeah,
to keep the secret from people on the inside, also to keep the illusion not just from the outside but also from people coming in on the inside. So yeah, I can see that's an interesting point actually.
yeah,
Um,
yeah."
or
And
they just
so
leave up the job posting. Does that happen a lot? People just leave a posting up after they
yeah.
fill the position,
Oh,
you know?
after they fill it, not. I haven't experienced it that much, at least in the UK. I haven't experienced that, but a job posting can be left up much longer than it should be. So
Yeah.
it could be that you've got 5 people in final stage, but the final stages aren't happening for a month, and then you want to do a presentation or you want them to meet the team. I think you can close the role because it's just not fair on people that are applying. And the role's left open. So it ends up being classed as a ghost job when really there was a job, but it's just it might as well be a ghost job because the people that are applying on the back end aren't actually going to be considered for that role.
So it's an offshoot effect of the long lead times in hiring, basically. That's
Yes,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, that makes
exactly.
sense. What about market competition for the why finding a job is so difficult at the moment? Market
Yeah.
competition being one.
So with market competition, it's interesting because I mentioned obviously a few things with that. So the mass layoffs causing competition, there being fewer job openings, the shift towards a skills based economy. You know, I'd argue that degrees and certain qualifications aren't as in demand as they were for a variety of reasons culturally. At least, I want to say, at least in the West, there's a lot more stories of that. And I see that as well, that passing an
Yeah.
interview has very little to do with your qualification, unless you're going to be a doctor or some job where you really, that qualification is
Yeah,
absolutely
unless it's a
critical.
regulated industry. Yeah, we're
Yes.
seeing
Yeah.
it's almost like a what would you call it? Like a reaction to the shifts that have happened in education, where now you can get a degree in practically anything,
Yeah.
and there's all kinds of new unknown qualifications, and the marketplace doesn't really know their value of these things, and it hasn't been demonstrated yet. So this is kind of like a pushback against that in a ways.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there isn't like a YouTube degree or something that exists just for
Yeah,
the
yeah,
volume of the value, etc. But yeah, so yeah, and AI as well, and I think I mentioned before about experienced workers in the market. So all of those elements happening together is creating an incredibly competitive market, and it can feel very demotivating. One thing I'd say though is you can you can still find a job by any of the methods that existed before plus the new methods. The challenge is that most people are not continuous job seekers. So I've done loads of contracts, so it means that I'm
mm,
used to the process. A lot of people aren't. They like to go in a job and stay in that job for 5 years, or well, 5 years is kind of in the days of old, but stay in that job
yeah,
for a little while, and not
yeah.
necessarily be looking. So what they don't know is that the market is still moving, it's just slower. So this is the reason why when you say persistence, I'm totally behind you on that. I completely agree that if you keep going, you will. It just sometimes feels like there's no end in sight, but actually the things are moving forward. And if you get a job search strategy and you stick to that and you keep going, it may take longer, but you will likely find something. It just takes much longer, and that middle time is very uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. Maybe you have a family to support, maybe you have a mortgage and a number of we've all got bills. So
Mm.
it's one of those things, but you likely will. Just don't completely give up, even if you have to slow down your search to get a bit of mental space. That's fine, but don't ever stop completely, because once you stop, it's so much harder to restart.
Yeah, and that's great. And I would add that there are many different ways of getting a job. So don't just focus on one method or one strategy.
Hmm.
Be investigating all the others, and and apply for a variety of roles. Don't just apply for like all big companies or all small companies, or you know a lot of, like, most people, I would venture a guess that most people's skills apply to certainly more than one industry. So you have relevant skills in one industry, which would be your core thing. Maybe you've had a career in that industry, but maybe unbeknownst to you, you would also be able to work in another industry because you have all the constituent skills for doing that, and that may be a viable option for you. So don't preclude any of those other options. Also investigate them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot of different types of employers that are all looking for various different things. So vary what you're doing, and hopefully between all of that, you will find something. Uh, Something I don't think we've covered that in depth. I know we touched on it a moment ago, but I think would be something we could definitely go in depth for, perhaps in the future. Would be the fake job postings, perhaps like how
Oh,
to recognize them, and because they're caused by many different things, many different situations.
yeah.
What might be the ways of identifying the different, the postings that are caused by for different reasons? I
Yeah.
think that might be
Mhm.
something that I think people would want to know.
Yeah, that's a big deal at the moment, and it's worse than it's been in the past. So that
Yeah.
would be a good topic for future. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Is there any, do you have any sort of last minute advice or tips or anything you wanted to get into this discussion?
So nothing that I haven't said for years and years, because
Mm.
and the reason I keep saying it is because I see a lot of candidates making similar, kind of falling into these similar tropes. Is it's just about preparation. Um, I still see like people that prepare the night before for an interview, or just don't look at the job description and link their skills to it and think about how they're going to link their skills to it in the interview. And a quick, just like cheat tip is if you can practice speaking your answers, you will hear if you can record yourself. It's a bit
There
uncomfortable.
you
I
go.
was horrified watching myself back when I first started YouTube. But I was like, my voice is that squeaky. Why didn't anyone tell me? But it's if you practice speaking your answers and record yourself, you will hear what the interviewer hears, and that's something that most people don't get an opportunity to do. And then you can tweak your answers, and by the time you actually get into the interview, you'll be presenting a refined version of yourself, and it affects your confidence too. Your confidence will go up as well. So just make sure that you prepare, make sure that you know your CV. Please go through it, even if you think, oh, I did it last year. No, do it now again. Go through it. Make sure you can talk through it fluidly. Memorize the main dates and what you did, and just those three things. So preparing, um, getting to know your resume clearly, and practicing speaking your answers to common interview questions. And you can find that anywhere on YouTube. So that would be my piece of advice.
Right on. That makes a lot of sense. And I agree with all of that entirely. I think that's great advice for people. So this was great, Amory. It's a pleasure to do this with you. I think you have a
Thank
lot
you.
of really in-depth knowledge about this stuff, and
I
you
really
shared a
enjoyed it.
lot of
Yeah, thank you.
valuable tips for a lot of people. I'm hoping that we will get a chance to do this in the future. And for anybody watching, there are several people watching. If you have topic recommendations or anything like that, feel free to send that to myself or to Amory on what you're wondering, what you're struggling with, some important topics that you'd like to know more about. And we will try to get to those and get you some answers.
Thank you
Right
very,
on.
very much. I've really enjoyed this. It's been really, really interesting. So yeah, I'd love to do something similar in future. And best of luck to anyone who is looking. Keep going. You will get there. So yeah,
I agree. You'll get there. Awesome. Thanks,
great.
everyone. We'll see you
Thank you.
soon.
Thank
Take
you.
care.